creativity in different contexts. This project is based on EULAC Focus project. It's funded by Horizon 2020 by European Commission. And I have worked with different universities based on European Union and Latin America, because I spent like 5 years in Ecuador. And in the last 3 years, I work here in Madrid, in Complutense University of Madrid. In this project, we focus on how research group work together, how researchers work together in different projects. My type of ethnography is based on multimodal interaction analysis. How you know, ethnography, the main activity of ethnography is to observing actors, researchers, workers, football players, for example, dancers, that he have worked in different contexts. But the action to observe is very similar to the action of other disciplines. For example, in chemistry, in biology, in physics, researchers always observe the phenomenon. So the ethnography, it's a wonderful word, but that we use in social science, but it's very common in other disciplines. When we observe the researcher, for example, we observe different things. For example, the language, the words that these researchers use in their collaboration. This is very important, the communication. But also the body movement, the gestures, how people move in the context, how researchers work in a laboratory. It's very interesting because it's a non-verbal communication. It's very important for human beings. The third important thing to observe when we enter in this context is the technology or the object, digital and analogical objects that are very common in different disciplines. In a laboratory, for example, the microscope or the screen. I think in every discipline, in each discipline, we work with a screen, for example, and how this analogical and digital object enter in our collaboration. This is the first thing to observe in our ethnography. And the fourth thing is the environment, the space, how researchers occupy the space. This is very important. These four different things that we observe in ethnography, I call it, with the other colleagues, the multimodal interaction analysis. We analyze how these four things we can to observe and to understand innovative way to do research. This is the basis. For example, I put here some pictures that we have collected in our research in science. So we can have, for example, at the right part of the screen, an analogical meeting in an office, and in the other side, in the left part of the screen, we have a Zoom meeting that is very common in the last 2 years of pandemic. And this type of interaction are, of course, analogical mixed to digital interaction, but also appears here, of course, communication, but also gestures, technology, and environment. And it's very important to focus in these 4 points. Another important thing in this work is focusing on the concept of innovation, because it's a very popular concept in different contexts, from political decisions, but also in scientific context and entrepreneurship. For example, environment innovation. It's a very common word. For us, this is not an empty word that contain different things, but innovations, every time we need to focus what is innovation in this or in that context. And to understand what is innovation in this ethnographic method, we try to understand the relation, for example, from researchers, with different types of researchers, with their instruments, because many times from this interaction between human beings and tools, it's when the innovation appears. Or, for example, when a person uses on software. It's very interesting because it's very common in different contexts how the human beings, when interact with this object, create something that have to do with the innovation. So the fourth point for us is to observe the relationship between innovators and their instruments. Because the technology is like a marker of new form of cooperation and innovation. Many times we spoke, like in this example from me, that I'm here in Complutense University of Madrid, I communicate with you in front of a webcam and on a screen. But many times, like in a laboratory or in an office, we communicate with other human beings through other devices, other technology, other tools. It's like on a screen, on a PowerPoint, or presentation, or prototype, like in this picture. And this part is fundamental for us to understand how technology is a part of this new form of cooperation and innovate in our team. And another important point, it's not like work in innovation, like in an isolated thing, but we need to put innovation in a collectivity, because in the last years, in the last decades, researchers don't work alone. To win, like for example, on an ERC, European Research Council project, or in a Horizon 2020 project, you need to work in a group, in a big group, with different partners from other universities, with different backgrounds. It's not like all great researchers that work alone in his or her laboratory, but we need to work continuously in collectivity. For us, this thing is very important, because how we can work in a collectivity. We have observed in our ethnography that it's important to have a good way to communicate between researchers, a good way to cooperate, good practices between our researchers. And many times in science, we have a big conflict for a lack of this good way to communicate. And it's very important that we focus on how we can improve our communication from small things, like, for example, an email or on a conversation in a WhatsApp group. But it's very important to maintain a propositive way between our colleagues, because these links with our colleagues are important to build trust. to build positive emotions and non-negative emotions. This is the basis for our research group to create a good environment to have, like, for example, good ideas, innovation, and creativity. And I'm sure that you know the small world context from the physics, for example, that we have in well, the theory of small world, that we have a contact with different parts, yes, of the network at the at the right time, when we have a critical time, when we have a problem. Maybe we connect with person that we have to know in another meeting, or in another context. For example, in these 2 years of pandemic, maybe we have started to collaborate with people that we have lost the contact in the last years. And but in an exact time, in a criticality time, like the pandemic, we start to collaborate with people that are we know, but they are not very close to us. Yes, and this is interesting. Like this small world networks that we occupy, we starting a new way to cooperate or to collaborate, or just only to distribute information. For example, in this paper that we have worked with my colleague from physics, in a social movement. In a social movement, maybe when you have some problems or negative emotion that you need to express, that you contact someone that is not close to you in a physical way, but maybe it's close to you for this problem. And the another important thing is to design, build, and implement new tools to improve this collaboration, this cooperation. For this reason, that we think it's very important to observe in the best context. We have done this research in a dancer company, for example, in a football team, in artistic collectivities, and in professional settings, like in this project with researchers. For us, it's interesting because in our methodology enter new tools, new digital tools. For example, cameras. Cameras help us to improve our methodology, like the ethnography, because in the last decades we have used ethnography with notebooks, digital notebook, where we write when we are observing the phenomenon. But in the last years, enter in an ethnographic process the audiovisual to collect and analyze data. For example, camera. Camera is a very important tool for us because later you can analyze the interaction between researchers and technology to understand this singularity, of this social and professional event, and maybe compare it with other contexts. For example, we have compared our context of researcher with context from dancers in this dance company, or engineering. And it's interesting how you can find similar patterns, because when we analyze, we need to identify patterns very similar in these different disciplines. Like, for example, in this project, we have observed how in a Zoom meeting, in a meeting based on a Zoom platform, with professors, researchers, and a group of students, is it possible to share ideas and to solve problems about a project. And it's a very common activity for us, like for example, in this workshop. Yes, we have some participants that they share ideas and projects, and maybe we have a questions answer section, and maybe we try to find solution altogether. But many times it's not so easy to do this in a digital context like this, because many times we have some technical problem. Many times we have someone that interrupts us, and many times we don't understand very well what the other participant say. Yes, this is because the body is not always there in this meeting. Our analogical body, of course, I see the size, the face, the hands, but it's very important how, like in a meeting in an analogical context, to observe the proximity of the body, the positions of the body, and these nuances, these very tiny little things that we only perceive in a face-to-face interaction, in a digital context disappear and start some problems. For this reason, that we need to observing how we can improve this type of interaction that we have every day. I put here some extras from these examples. Yes, how, for example, in this meeting, the participants try to find a solution, and also try to share positive emotion, because many times in this cold technology, many times those screens of cold technology don't pass positive emotion. So for this reason, or smile, or good attitude to listen the participants, maybe this to open our camera and to have a great environment that help us to generate a positive way to communicate, help us. And well, if you have some interest about this project, I can share the different papers. Yes, in this case, it was for to try an innovative solution for a problem. But I think it's important for us our conclusions to understand how ethnography it's important for every discipline, for every area. Maybe we use another word, not ethnography, just observing, okay? But this action to observe, we need to have a systematically way to observe. Many times we write a table with using different codes, different to specify the activity of the participants, or many times we use the camera. And for us, this structure interrupts the chaos, the chaotic of the observation, because In social science, we have the war between quantitative and qualitative methods. But for example, good Jose Maria, we turn the camera to improve our positive emotion. I agree with you. And we need to systematize this because our interactions are very chaotic. Our meetings are very chaotic. And we need to have an order to do this and to understand how we have generated a problem. Maybe for example, like the comment of Jose Maria to turn off on the camera is very important because this stimulate new ideas, creativity, positive emotions. And but with our ethnography, we have just observed this. How, like for example, how happy face can help to improve this. And of course, we are human beings. The disorder is part of our structure. With ethnography, we try to avoid this disorder. Our general idea here, because it's not a lack of conclusion, but it's a way to think and to work together during this workshop. That innovation is distributed in collaborative emergency of structural groups, like for example this workshop. Because I share an idea, yeah, Jose Maria share an idea, Manuela share another idea, and maybe when we interact with these different ideas in this cooperative, a collaborative way, we can have a better idea. But many times this is very hard to share this idea, to negotiate, and ethnography help us to observe how is the best way to try to share ideas together. Well, I don't know if it was too short or too long, my presentation, but I prefer present something like this. It's in a very general way, not to focus only on part of my research. Can be too many sociological perspectives. Okay.
Thank you, Simone.
Turn off the sound, your sound, the microphone, and the speaker. The problem is with the speaker because you have a feedback. So I turn it off here.
My sound is in the.
The sound is there.
My sound is not.
Has to have the sound on if we open more maybe it's your mobile.
No,
We have some problems of sound.
let's see if that's what maybe that was mine. So I just wanted to turn on the camera. No, it was not.
It was not yet.
It was. So it's somebody's speaker. Okay, turn it off, and then you won't hear it. You will hear it. Because my microphone is off.
Mine is also.
And you, but yeah.
This is a typical
Hello,
example.
Simone.
Yes, of a technical problem in virtual meeting about the micro.
¿Me acoplo yo en su ordenador?
No, he doesn't have money. And you have the speaker. Yeah, the speaker. Only the speaker. But I have
You also have the speaker.
A ver, ahora igual. Y con el casco igual. Cierra ahí.
And now,
Yes, okay.
yes.
So now it will be.
Now I have it on.
Yes. So now you can hear us.
But can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
But can you hear all of us?
Es mi micrófono.
Yeah.
It depends on.
We have to have the microphone and the speaker from one computer.
Okay.
Otherwise, it makes up.
But I'm not sure if it will be record or catch all the voices.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a problem. But if someone wants to speak, then you turn off your
Okay,
microphone.
okay,
And,
Thank you, Simon. Any questions, any comments for the rest of assistants?
From the interaction part. That's interesting, yeah?
Yes.
So I'll turn it off.
So
Manuela, are you talking? No.
and speakers.
okay, I was. So Simon, I think I. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now we can. And but we can't hear. What? Put now the sound.
Okay.
Possibly
we hear you and you hear us.
Say something.
He has the microphone off.
No, Simon.
Well, there is no questions.
No. Yes. I was making a question, but we didn't. The sound didn't come out.
Okay.
I was trying to put the question. So what I was saying is that I find very interesting what you present as to investigate. So the social interaction and how innovation happens and the methodology we can follow to bring the different gatherings of information that can be useful to distinguish the phenomena that are happening. But how could we generalize that as a method for bringing disciplines together? Could you explain how some methodological hints that could be generalized?
Well, this is a great question, Jose Maria, because we have tried to use this methodology outside the social science because it's very common in sociology, for example, or in anthropology, the ethnography, but it's not so common in another discipline. it is interesting, this different example that I explained in my presentation, that I've worked with other researchers from other areas like physics or math or chemistry. And because it's something that can find a point of common with the other disciplines, because there is no ethnography in chemistry or in physics, but there is observation. So, but in physics, for example, when they observe a phenomenon, they have a methodology, and that we can try to use this concept, for example, this analysis network of small worlds, and it was interesting because in that example, in that research, the physics work in a granulated model, yes, with tiny particles of plastic, and they observe how when the temperature is elevated, different part of these tiny particles of plastic start to move. Mm? And we have observed this in an ethnographic way. Yes, not like, of course, with a microscope, with a video of this interaction for our perspective from social science, but it's okay, it's a model from physics, but we have understand in social science, and we have start to compare it these two models, for example, from the physics, from this granulate model, or in a social movement. When there is a problem in society, people starting to communicate together, starting to go in the streets to create a protest or to occupy a building, and the same way that happen in these tiny particles of plastic. And this is thanks to the ethnography, because we have observed a phenomenon, we have observed another phenomenon, and we try to compare, like there is a new way to understand a social phenomenon or a physical phenomenon. But it's like an innovation, innovative methodology for us, because it's not very common or traditional way to study a phenomenon.
Yeah,
Can I contribute also?
of course. It's your computer, by the way.
Okay, it's my computer. You can go to yours. All right. Hi, Simone. Indeed, I totally agree with you. And in my view, and from what I understand from how we apply human-computer interaction in interaction design nowadays, and if we compare it to previous generations of designers that designed information systems, nowadays we cannot speak about design without having an ethnographic method beforehand. So I would say that design starts with research, and the core of research in the human-centered design is ethnographic. And we also apply ethnographic methods like ethnomethodology and things that understand the context, the user, the culture. So I would say that nowadays it's imperative. We cannot design without understanding all these phenomena and the entities of the system that we have at hand. So I totally agree with you that innovation comes hand by hand with ethnographic methods. And maybe it started from social sciences and experimenting with people in Africa, but nowadays it is imperative to use it in every context where we have information systems to be designed in the future. So I totally agree that innovation is driven by ethnographic methods.
Great, Modesto. Many thanks. Great to see you here.
Nice to see you too.
In any case, so the example, Simon, that you gave on the network, because this is kind of more applying the network theory to the interaction that happens with human agents or with physical agents, if I understood correctly. So the similarity that you put is more to see that network theory can be a useful approach to see what happened with the interaction of one kind of agents and another kind of agents, more than what the ethnographic method can provide. So the ethnographic method, what the ethnographic method can enable us to see is to distinguish the interactions that exist. And then by finding out the interactions, then we can map it in terms of the network. But it is actually using network theory, so what provides the common ground. But what I would say, rather, if I understand it correctly, so the ethnographic method, it is necessary for the tackling of problems that are complex and that are, in which some social interaction exists. So if any problem, usually most of the problems, we always need to deal with something that happens with more than just, for example, physical particles or just chemicals between each other, or just living beings or cells with others. So usually we need to deal with a broader context, and the complex problems we really need to tackle are so sophisticated that we need to deal with more openly and to see what is relevant and to find the relevant interactions that exist, and then we can map it into some theory that enable us to model that correctly. Like, for example, it can be network theory or maybe system theory if we see that the linkage is so strong that it's stable and that there is a feedback and so on.
Well, actually, ethnographic approaches try to understand the context itself, and they suppose that if you are not part of the context and you investigate the interrelations of the actors within that context, then you will possibly miss things. So this is why MID went to apply ethnographic methods and lived with the people there. So before the intervention, the ethnographic approach is there to understand everything, from the tools they use, from the culture they have, from their behavior, their physical characteristics. You see, it is like I would say a Sherlock Holmes approach in understanding the context. So you go there and you try to find out what happens. But of course, what Simone says as well is that innovation comes after that. When you have an ethnographic approach, and then you have different probably designers or stakeholders collaborating on top of the ethnographic methodology.
But for the people who are laying on that, can you give some ideas about what are the basics of ethnography? So
yes, well, very interesting your contribution, Modesto's contribution. First, because this last contribution from Modesto, I remember about the actor network theory by Bruno Latour, a French philosopher. And
see, this morning we were talking about.
Yes, okay. And it's a good way to enter to use ethnography in a Bruno Latour's way, because it's not only you are part of the contest and we try to design to draw your relation with the tools, the other participants, not, but the theory of Bruno Latour is observed all together. Yes, and it's a single individual network. Okay, it's composed by participants, researchers, tools, internet, context, environment, yes, differently, but it's not important where you or participant is in this network, because it's you only can understand this network altogether. Because if you isolate an item or a person or a tool, you have a completely different network. And this is a first step, I think, to understand ethnography. Of course, we need to coordinate this. One of the most critical about the tool is that when you need to put in practice this, it's very hard, because you need to select who are the participants, what type of tools they use. And I think it's important to structure this, like, for example, in design thinking or in human-machine interaction. And that is very important to draw these links. But I think it's important to understand the general way how to work this network, not the specific, not entering the micro, but it's
Yes.
the macro.
Actually, I totally agree on that too. You see, what we call, I will describe it later on, but the designerly approach, I mean the design approach, not the engineering, the hardcore engineering, states that we use ethnographic methods to better understand, the different parts that structure the system. And the purpose on top of that is to create a rich picture, a rich understanding of what happens, which is what you describe as the holistic image of the system, the idea of how things work in general. So you cannot understand what happens, you cannot get that rich picture if you don't understand the parts. The parts and the whole picture are heavily interrelated, and possibly they don't even structure the whole. The sum of the parts possibly do not necessarily structure the whole. Possibly the whole is much more different because of their interactions. So I would even argue that the whole is different from the sum of its parts rather than more. It's definitely different. We don't know if it's more or less, but it's definitely different. Yes, and this is what we need to understand. We need to get that rich picture, which is different from what every single actor on the network understands and plays.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, our friends, so Gustavo from University of Mexico, UNAM, from UNAM, they did a very interesting work in which, by using the network theory, they saw one interesting similarity between some electric circuits. The other thing was the distribution of colors in painter, and the other was of tones in music. And they saw that for several, when you arrive to some state in the circuit, it's you see the same kind of distribution, and so the description, the parameter, or some of the characteristics of the networks are really common. So you can use the same kind of meta description to refer to the three. And so I find it really nice, interesting, very transdisciplinary.
Yes, of course. Based on mathematical approach or not?
So yes, so they use network theory and using the mathematical,
yes,
the statistical part of network theory. So see that the kind of structure that you can see, the kind of structure is similar. So
it's true.
Similar, structural properties. Okay, so thank you very much, Simone.
Thank you.
So then we can maybe move to the design science
Okay.
to your contribution.
The design. Give you a short introduction of what is the design approach we follow in my lab and my my university. So this will be very short and very brief, and then I will go on to describe what is interaction design and how we approach it, and then what we can think of in terms of interaction. Does it change? No.
Okay. Okay.
No.
Yeah, no.
Okay, it takes some time to change. All right. So the first question we have here is if we can define what is design, and indeed this is quite difficult thing to define, to be honest. Although it sounds very familiar, and in many cases we think that we know what it is about. It is very difficult to define it because in different domains it has a different meaning, and it does not change.
Okay. Okay.
Why is that? Okay.
No, yeah.
So for some reason I have to switch back to the slides to change. I don't know why that. So in a recent paper in 2001, in the Journal of Design, Economics and Innovation, it identifies almost 79 distinct clusters, each representing a different discussion over the 20 years of span of the PhD design email list. And we see that the different theorists have posited a wide variety of definitions for design over the years. And one of the earliest and most prominent theories about what design constitutes is Herbert Simon's, where he states that in that seminal paper he published in Design Studies, that design, or the science of the artificial, is the third science after the natural and social sciences. Moreover, in a book published in 1996, Simon states that engineering, medicine, business, and architecture and painting are concerned not with the necessary, but with the contingent, not with how things are, but how things they might be, in short, with design involved in between. So this approach deals not only with the current state of things, but with future possibilities. It is, as I said before, a contingent that explores futures, possible futures. So we can see design as something that allows us to explore and create at the same time. Now again, it does not change.
No.
So, however, the outcomes of both design and science are becoming more and more diverse by the day. So we can also look at the approach to define design by the way it develops things rather than by the existence of things themselves, by virtue of the method and the methodology rather than the outcome itself. So the edges of design and science blur and overlap when we look at each conceptually, but they are generally different in method. So although it might sound that design can easily be a discipline of science, they are different in many ways. Sorry, but it's very difficult for me to continue with without changing the slides. Give me a second to see. For some reason, I click on change, but they don't.
You don't move for me.
So what you see now?
Loading. No, now loading.
Loading.
But no, but before we were seeing the.
Yes, but for some reason it does not allow me to.
Set it or what? But you were setting it.
When I click, it does not go
Yeah,
to the.
it did happen also to me this morning. But,
Really?
but there was something that was allowing to move. If you click on the
Okay.
image, then it moves.
Yes. So I
So by
will
clicking
share
on the, so I asked, it also happened to me, and I was trying. Sometimes I was trying to move forward with the arrow, it didn't go. But then when you click on the image, it moved. But I don't know whether it's going to be the same.
Let's see. So if I, what can you see now? You can see.
The same sign.
Okay, let me see now. But you see, it does not change. Anyways, broadly speaking, design science or design thinking is an approach for structured and collaborative development of new solutions. Knowledge about them and their use and environment. Hartzell claims that Simon never completed the task of grounding design theory in reality, and that Simon's delineation of design with science as part of the problem solving was too limiting. Problem solving is part of design, not the other way around. He suggests that humans are naturally good designers but limited decision makers. On the other hand, Gale says that while Simon did indeed see design as part of the problem solving, it is not, in fact, because the design problem and design solution tend to co-evolve. You see, as long as we start with a problem that is not very well defined, then during the process of finding the solution, we very often redefine the problem space itself. So Gallet notes that Donald Schoen also objected to Simon's notion of a science of design, because science can only be applied to well-formed problems, which is seldom possible in design, which in general deal with ill-defined or what we call wicked problems that cannot be bounded. So, oh, come on. It changes faster than I expect. Yeah. So design is a contingent process of speculative character about possible futures. Design is goal-directed. It means that it is in a way driven by a goal. It aims to establish a different future. So it is talking about future possibilities. It is teleological. It follows needs to establish solutions. So we need to define very well what the needs are in order to be teleological. So we are not teleological for the sake of finishing something, for creating a final product. We are talking about a teleological state where we fulfill the needs that were identified in the beginning or during the process. And of course, it is recursive, which means that design is an iterative process. It evaluates solutions and it goes back and forth. Design is at the same time intentional. In design, the actors involved in the actual process of designing engage in an intentional activity that involves both reasoning and intuition. So it's not, I would say, it's not art. Design is not art. It's not science at the same time, but it is a mix of intuition and reason at the same time. And at the same time, because we involve different stakeholders, we can, in cases where we have, for instance, participatory design processes, we also have that creative behavior of the participants. So intuition is something that can spontaneously give us results we didn't expect, but we still have to evaluate them within the context. We cannot do it without a context. because design is purposeful. So this is how I distinguish it sometimes with art, and especially with experimental forms of art, where we just experiment with what we can do, and we don't care about the consequences. Design, as I said before, is often a collaborative process, which means that it involves different stakeholders that collaborate together, and they cooperate very often. It's not necessary, but it is nowadays, especially that depends on the scale of the project at hand. So if we have a very complex project, collaborative processes are imperative, I would say. It's very difficult to design individually and then create something on top of that process. For these reasons, we defined in my department design as both a scientific as well as a creative process. The design process involves both methodology and practice. And as I've seen earlier on Simone's presentation, he possibly also reads Goodwin's methodology of goal-directed design. And this is an example. This figure here is an example of how I think about the goal-directed design methodology. I don't think it is linear as Goodwin presents it. She presents it in a linear fashion. I think that it has a linear character. It happens in a way. There is a time arrow that it follows, but I wouldn't say that we need to finish one step in order to begin the other. So in many cases, for instance, we do research, and then from research we collect data, then later we will model, and we will produce requirements, we will define the framework, we will do design, detailed design. But very often, if we identify that we are not really sure about what we are doing in a step, then we might go back and forth. So I wouldn't say that it has a linear character. What rules the process of applying such methodologies is the design team. If the design team has many questions, then we might move back and forth within a methodology, and possibly, as the postmoderns think about management, we mix and match methodologies and techniques and processes. But it's not random. Okay, it's not random. It follows a purpose. So design also includes the user or the human, and it is human-centered, I would say. Till the last few years, we generally thought that the paradigm we experienced the last decade was about human-centered design. And that human-centered design had 4 basic principles. It was people-centered, tried to solve the right problem, considered everything as a system, as a whole, and tried to give simple and small interventions in order to approach the goal, the final solution. Of course, design is an iterative process. Very often we see models, or I would say, I wouldn't call it, this is the double diamond methodology. I wouldn't call it methodology, method, or whatever, technique of applying design. So if you see the double diamond model, it gives us that iterative character where we define the problem space, and then we try to provide the solution, but this happens again and again. Okay, and we start usually from low fidelity prototypes where we express our ideas or we give hints about the solution, and later on we redefine the problem space by giving a second iteration, third, and so on. So it is an iterative process. lately, we also tend to see beyond the human-centered paradigm. We tend to see the post-human or the a paradigm that does not have the user as a human at the center, but also we think and experiment with life-centered, I would put it in brackets, life-centered approaches, where we also have synthetic life in the game. So we might talk about neurorobotics, or we might talk about artificial intelligence, we might talk about synthetic biology, bioethics, and things that arise because of new entities that appear to be alive, not necessarily alive as we define it in terms of survival and as we define our existence. So what is the future of design? This is where everything ends, and this is why I try to pose some questions here. How can we design now the actual tools, methodologies, methods to be used in the future? This is a big question here. Can we design without having a systemic approach in mind? Can we design individually, or we need holistic approaches towards the design of that future? What are the requirements for a sustainable future that is designed intentionally now for the future generations to experience it? Because when we talk about user experience design now, in general we have the temporality of time is very small. We think about the user interacting with the system maybe tomorrow, or a few weeks later, or today. But what happens when we think ahead, very ahead, when we think about future generations and how we design interactions today that will create a sustainable future for the future generations, and how will they experience it? How can we speculate about this? How can we theorize? So what is the future here, and what is the future of information systems to come? These are questions that can be discussed later on in the workshop. I don't think that we can answer them now. And this is where my initial presentation for defining and understanding what I'm talking about for the design approach, I would like to pose them here in the beginning, and then I don't know if I continue with the second presentation or how do we do it.
I think
Should I continue?
if it is directly connected, because it's
sort of connected. Okay, I start with the history of interaction design, but then I try to give some philosophical, ideas about what I think about interaction.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, if you have any questions, yes, of course. We can make it. It doesn't work. Oh, I should turn it off and then.
Yeah.
maybe because you have the
Okay. Now? Okay. But okay. So yeah, I thank you for the interesting presentation. I was just wondering, and my question is related to what Rafael originally wanted to present, but he couldn't, which is the unpredictability or the chance. You said that interaction design is goal-oriented, that it is goal-directed.
Mm-hmm.
And can you always know how the users, for instance, will interact with the software, with the technologies? What can happen? Do you also like put some open space, sort of freedom into the design so that they can use it to some extent freely? I was thinking about the internet, for instance, which was originally developed for military purposes, and then it was used in academy and in local public. And I think originally nobody realized how it will change the world in the 70s.
Yeah.
Or let's take the example of cryptocurrencies.
Mhm.
You know, they were direction to the financial crisis after the year 2008, and now, you know, they have the tokens, and there's a lot of possible uses for the technologies and for the chain where the information is stored, like the Web 3.0, etc. So I think it's very difficult. Yeah, it's similar also in art, that the authors of the piece of art may have different intentions and different interpretation of their products compared to the audience, which can conceive and perceive the product very differently. So I think it's impossible, and it wouldn't be also too limiting to have just the goal-directed design without considering, or no, not considering, but without giving also the users enough freedom and space to use it for the purposes they form themselves, and they can't tell you before they use it or before the time passes, so that they experience something different to what you think they will do with it. So I think the problem or the risk that can be related to this goal-directed design is that you will limit the users and close them in sort of totality, that they can't do it differently than, because the software won't allow that.
I should I?
Yeah. But then maybe I should turn it off.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes, but we cannot hear ourselves. Give me a second. Probably there is a shortcut somewhere. Can you hear us now? Yes. All right. What I mean goal-directed design. This is possibly, this is why I mentioned teleological process, but at the same time goal-directed. These are two different things in my opinion. Goal-directed design means that we define some sort of goals that are related to the users. We don't know what the end product will be. So we identify goals on an instance. Now we design for these goals, but the final product we will have will not necessarily afford only these requirements we defined. So I would say that there is a difference in describing what means goal-directed from teleological. Goal-directed means that we involve users, and also we have methods there and techniques. For instance, we create personas that describe the users, and we identify needs and goals and everyday needs and needs that are related to their worldview. So we create the ideal user and what he or she needs, and this is where we find the goals for the design. This, as I said, is an iterative process, and we might redefine them again and again. Another notion that is closely related to what you said is affordances. And it is very close. They are action possibilities of what a product can do and what a product can do outside the design space. So, for instance, I would say you have a credit card to pick up money from the bank ATM, but with the same credit card, you can clean the windows from your vehicle from snow. That was not intended.
Yeah.
Okay, but these are action possibilities, and this is what Norman also defines as an affordance. He gives also in very iconic videos where he describes what is a book. You can read the book, you can take notes from the pages of the book, you can even use it, to cover your eyes to sleep. But this was not intended. So goal-directed design is about the intended things, not the non-intended, the action possibilities beyond the design scope. And of course, you are right. How can we identify? We cannot identify them during the design process itself or the prototyping process. We need a design phase where we redefine the requirements. And this is what also why I agree with Simon and what he presented earlier, that we need methods or soft methods of research where we redefine what the problem space is. So goal-directed is about redefining goals. Of course, in design, we have to put full stops. Okay, in order to design, you have to say, this is a final prototype, and this is, you can use it now. Okay. And then we can deconstruct it again and do a second iteration. So this is why you have different versions of mobiles, you have different versions of systems, you have upgrades. Design is a messy situation. Okay, it is something.
That's also the recursive.
It is recursive. It evolves. It evolves hand by hand with the requirements. If requirements change, if the paradigm changes, then we have to redefine. We have to do another iteration, and we have to do another iteration outside the design process itself. We have to repeat the design because we have also iterations within the design process with the fixed requirements. So I would say that we have a formative phase in design where we design with specific requirements and we give a solution. And we have another occurrence of the iteration, which is after we evaluate, we do the summative evaluation, we have a final prototype where we completed the first set, we are happy with the requirements and how they fulfill them, and then we identify new requirements. This is another phase outside the initial design phase. So I would say that innovation takes place in various steps. Innovation takes place within the design process itself in its formative character, when we have a specific set of requirements and we design based on these. And also innovation takes place when we exit the design phase, the initial design phase. We evaluate summatively the product we have, and we say, okay, we fulfill the initial set of requirements, and we redefine new requirements because something changed in the context, in the society, in everywhere. Okay, I said too much.
But what my point was,
Yeah.
that sometimes, it's like art for me to some extent. Like Immanuel Kant, the way Immanuel Kant defined art, it has also purpose in itself.
Okay, yes, of course.
That was my point regarding
Yes, of course.
The goal-directed.
Of course. I mean, goal-directed is, I would say, it is a direction. It's not something that I follow strictly. It is a direction that, okay, there is a goal, we move towards that goal, but of course, how the creative process takes place, it's very complicated. It has...
Sorry, one moment. Simon, do you have any questions?
Yes. Thanks, Modestos, for this presentation. It's a very interesting presentation and combined very well with my previous one, because it's true, the design science, design thinking, design interaction have a similar aspect to share with ethnography. And I like what you have commented in these last questions about the affordance, because in design thinking, many times we try to describe or to improve or to find solution for a problem in a specific interaction, but many times we don't have we don't know the role of emotions in this design thinking. For example, from a psychological perspective, because we have different users that feel anxiety, unrest, negative emotions, fear to use our platform. and many times these emotions are not entering this design interaction. For this reason, I feel that the affordance concept is very useful for the design thinking. For example, the emotional affordance, the range of different emotion that a user can feel in interaction, like with a tool, with a platform, and I think there is future to put these emotions in this design interaction. What do you think about this?
About emotion and emotional design, yes, actually, emotion plays a critical role in the adaptation of the systems. We might have designed the perfect system with the perfect algorithms behind it, and users never use it, never adapt it. And this happens because we neglected to consider seriously what are the emotional states of the user when interacting with the system. So design for emotion is a trend today, I would say. It is a hot topic in interaction design, along with other topics that arise, like, for instance, well-being and interaction design, or even topics that consider the user more holistically, like soma-aesthetics, for instance. Soma-aesthetics is another hot topic that we've seen in previous CAI conference. So the emotional and the somatic experience of the user in general is something that we should consider. Of course, it is very abstract now. I mean, I cannot go into detail of how we can do that, because it involves many methodological steps and practical steps. And especially, for instance, in the case of soma aesthetics, we don't even have a very concrete methodological technique to approach it. But the researchers in the domain definitely see the value of these characteristics. Tomorrow I will try to describe the user and what is behind the user, and we will see the different facets of the user. The user is not only rational, is not only physical, but also it is emotional, and it has psychological states that cannot even him or herself can understand. So I would say that the emotion is a very hot topic. We should consider it, really, and we have also a domain there about the user experience and emotion and the design of these. Of course, I have to make a small. I have to make a small note here that we cannot design experiences. Okay, we cannot design experiences and emotions themselves. I would possibly agree more with the autopoietic theory of Maturana and Varela that say that we perturb experiences to the systems. We cannot intervene in what happens inside the actor, inside the user. We cannot put experiences in their minds. We just do the perturbations. We design the interactions and the horizon around the user, and then experiences, emerge in a way. Okay, we're not definitely sure what will happen in the user. Okay, it is a black box, in my opinion.
So does it mean that the only thing we can do is observe whether they are positive or negative?
We experiment. We create something, and we experiment with many users, and we do it statistically, I would say. We're not sure that this system will work the same on every user.
So we have no clue.
No, we have no clue. We only do it statistically, I would say.
So, like in that Darwinian way, moving in all directions to see what happens.
Yes, but
what is better.
Yeah, but after all, I mean, good practices are obviously working better than others. So it is it is again a survival of the fittest in terms of methodology there and practice.
Yeah, so when something survives in the long term, then
Yeah, it is a problem.
it's a problem, but you need to depart from that point.
Yeah, you have to find the starting point. Okay, of course, it's not a living organism, and different designers or actors within the design sphere will bring different ideas, starting from different points. So you have the plurality. It's not a problem. I wouldn't say that it is a problem that we all tend to design the same thing, although it is happening. Okay, for instance, you have material design on your mobiles. Okay, we all have material design, which is the Google thing on our mobiles. We all are used to it. We cannot think outside of it. If I change the interface on your mobile now, you will have a hard time using it. So I would say that good solutions tend to survive more than others. But again, they evolve. We have paradigm shifts, and even there, we have. I mean, from the Windows desktop to the mobile desktop you have on your mobile device, they are much different now. Yeah. So it is a matter of the designer to do it, really, to understand the requirements and do new ideas. Okay. I don't know if I answer it directly, but I tend to speak a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. 15 minutes
Break.
left until
Okay.
the end of the session.
Oh, really?
All right.
We can do it. Well, Simon said that he had to leave, but we can continue if we need.
Continue with
So
my
continue a little
presentation.
bit.
Who else is presenting? Because I don't want to take the.
Yeah, you wanted to go also with the understanding the design.
Actually, I can skip the history and go to the hot thing.
Okay,
So
maybe you can.
because also Thomas is
I
here.
already presented today.
But you wanted also about the system. No?
I can do it tomorrow as well. I can connect it somehow.
Okay, then you can go on to the.
Okay, I will
the
skip.
understanding. The
I will.
design.
I will.
do it quickly because
Actually, it's in good connection to what you have shown. Right.
Actually, it is a bit heavy. I warned you, but let's try.
like in what sense, you know, like philosophy.
Yeah. I will go directly
looking
to.
forward.
Okay, I will go directly to. I will skip all history and then.
Why? Do it quickly. Do it just do it.
It will take long.
As you want.
It will take long.
How many slides do you have?
Many.
Like 20
So,
or 50?
Many, and they are heavy. So I would start from here and maybe skip a few and then go to the philosophical part that possibly interests you. Possibly, I don't say that it might be interesting because these are ideas that I experiment with my students and myself, and possibly you will find it interesting. If you don't, it's not a problem. I will present it anyways. So interaction design concerns itself with analyzing and modeling the structure of the composite dialogue that develops between people on the one hand and products and systems on the other. Okay, it is some sort, it is structured as a language, I would say. And that language also is a composite, it is a dialogue in a way. It is related to the emergence of experiences to people, as well as the connections between people that are mediated by some product or system. The aim of interaction design is the study. Oops, sorry. The aim of interaction design is the study of these interactions. It is to learn how to design and develop interactions and systems that will meet occasionally different needs and desires of the users, and according to the particular context and developing framework of interaction. So this is why we need also ethnomethodological approaches, because we need to understand the context, the contextual information. And also we use, for instance, contextual design that includes contextual inquiry. to define the rich picture of the problem space of the context. So what puts design in interaction design? Interaction design is a blended endeavor of process, methodology, and attitude. There is no doubt that interaction design as a design discipline differs from applied human-computer interaction and cognitive psychology. I will skip this. So interaction design, if you see, it lies at I have a schema here that shows us how it lies at the junction of different and several design or computing disciplines. So for instance, you can see user experience as a superset of interaction design and architecture, but at the same time, you will see it colliding with human-computer interaction. So depending on the perspective, you can see what is more in every discipline. So some theory. What is interaction design? Design is contextual, teleological, and possibly purposeful activity towards an end or goal within a specific context of requirements. But interaction is more complicated, I would say. Very often we think about interaction in terms of a living organism interacting with the environment, doing something, do some activity or some change to the environment. And we say that, okay, I identify it, here we have interaction. Very often we think that it is a human being or a robot or something interacting with another piece of technology. And we think that interaction is there. But where really is interaction? Is it on the computer or is it on the user? We will see it later on. Very often we think interaction between human beings or living entities, and we apply it at a higher level of communication or cooperation, and we see that interaction is already there. So where is interaction? If we have, I try to make it for my students here as simple as possible. So where is interaction here? If we have a living organism and we have an entity in their environment, where exactly do you define interaction? Any ideas?
It's impossible to define.
Yeah, where exactly do you think that it is? Where it happens?
Action and reaction.
You can think of it as an action and reaction mechanism, but let's see how it is structured. If we have an object, and then if we have a subject, then possibly we have interaction in between, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not really. Yes, it's not there. I know. We might think that it is an emergent property. It's something that happens emergent in an emergent fashion. That it is the relation between these two entities, and it's above. We can possibly think of it in between a subject and another subject, and possibly mediated by another object or system. So, for instance, we have Google Meet that is in between of us now, and we're subjects in different space and time, and interaction takes place there. But then what is interaction? Is it meaning? After all? So there are other factors that we should consider there. Interaction has to do with time, the environment, the space-time continuum. It might be sensual, it might be mental or cognitive, it might be tangible if we are interacting with tangible objects around us in our environment, and possibly tangibility can be transferred now across the network. Okay, it's not only something that we have here and we interact with it, but for instance, I can play games and I can have a feedback mechanism on my controller, and you have another controller, and we can have that, you know, reaction over the system. It is social, and very often we consider it as embodied. So if we move forward from that description we gave earlier, if we continue with the Cartesian separation between mind and matter, then we can think of what you said as an action reaction mechanism, where we see the conscious or the unconscious side of it, because we don't know what happens there, if the interaction is conscious or unconscious. We cannot tell if it is intentional or unintentional or spontaneous. Possibly it will be purposeful and teleological or creative or accidental. Everything is here on the table. As we said earlier, it has a meaning. It has a meaning production mechanism behind it. So when interaction takes place among or between subjects, we expect some sort of meaning making to take place. And we consider that meaning is what keeps interaction happening. So because we might have spontaneous interaction or accidental, okay, I don't communicate with you, I don't make, you know, meaning, but I still interact spontaneously. But it might start from an accidental, in an accidental fashion, but we can see it is stratified to produce meaning as well. And then we have the phenomenological tradition where everything starts. And this is where all questions start to arise. The traditional dualist model supposes separation between what Descartes called the res cogitans and the res extensa, where he separated mind from matter. And phenomenology argues that thinking does not occur separately from being and acting. Thus, attempted phenomenology itself to reconstruct the relationship between the existence and action without this separation. And this is what nowadays we follow in terms of interaction, in understanding interaction. Phenomenology is very influential in human-computer interaction, interaction design, and user experience today. Almost all practices related to interaction design, user experience, and the theoretical frameworks of HCI approach interaction within the phenomenological tradition. Thus, we consider it as a form of embodied interaction. It is something that has that phenomenological character. We cannot separate it from there. So let's talk a little bit about the embodiment thing. Embodiment does not simply mean physical manifestation. Two bodies interact with each other. Okay. For Doris, in 2001, in his book, it means embodiment means being grounded in and emerging out of everyday mundane experiences. Embodiment is a foundational property out of which meaning, theory, and action arise. So embodiment is the property of our engagement with the world that allows us to make it meaningful. So there is a meaning-making mechanism involved in the phenomenological tradition. So we have embodied phenomena, which are those which by their nature occur in real time and space. Okay. So embodied interaction is the creation, manipulation, and sharing of meaning through engaged interaction with artifacts. Even when we have more than one actors or not. Okay. Doris concludes with a very interesting point in his book. The major lesson that I draw from the phenomenological work is that embodiment is about the relationship between action and meaning. He means action and meaning for the interacting subject. It's not clear here. Then the phenomenological tradition in the philosophy of interaction stops here. So how do we continue from there? So phenomenology in general is being in the world. It's about what Husserl mentioned. It is concerned with how the life world was based in everyday embodiment experience rather than abstract reasoning. Or what Schutz stated, when he recognized that this conception of the life world could be extended to address problems in social interaction. Furthermore, Heidegger considered it as an embodied action that was essential to our mode of being and to the ways in which we encounter the world. And finally, we have Merleau-Ponty that emphasized the critical role of the body in mediating between internal and external experience. All of these accounts so far focus on the idea of a world that we, as meaning, we, including artificial, I would say, not we as human, okay, because now we can think of we, an artificial system, I would say, that we as meaning producing subjects encounter different directly rather than abstractly. Phenomenology thus explored the relationship between embodied meaning and action. Meaning is not abstract, is not found in the world in which we act, and which acts upon us. Doris continues by stating, this world is already filled with meaning. Its meaning is to be found in the way in which it reveals itself to us, as being available for our actions. It is only through those actions and the possibility for actions that the world affords us. So this is what we discussed earlier about the affordances. That we can come to find the world in both its physical and social manifestations meaningful. The promise of phenomenology was a desire for realism that, in my opinion, failed to be delivered. Phenomenology was a philosophical movement that desired realism, but in my opinion, it desired it possibly, I wouldn't say in the wrong way, but possibly with the philosophy we had at the time and what we could understand. So what is the problems of phenomenology? Why we have philosophers today talk about the end of phenomenology? The intentional objects exist only as correlates of a thinker. They have no autonomous status. Okay. We need to have an agent to have intentionality, which is very weird in a way. Phenomenology is limited in terms of describing realism, therefore. It retains a relationship between transcendental ego, lived body in the world, and lived body in the world. What we called embodied interaction earlier. Phenomenology remains committed to a form of Kantianism, as we can see. Rather than providing the real, the realist alternative that it desired, so it cannot fulfill its own promise. And we have a few philosophical movements today that try to tackle this problem of correlationism, as we will see later on. So speculative realism is one of these that attempts to signal an end to phenomenology by focusing in deconstructing its inner core, Kantianism. The major concept it uses here is correlationism. So we'll go even deeper there and describe what correlationism is. In his book, Quantan Meyasu defines correlationism as the idea according to which we only ever have access to the correlation between thinking and being, and never to either term considered apart from the other. We cannot therefore see thinking apart from being, and being apart from thinking. Philosophies that fall within this definition are called philosophies of access and privilege the human being's access to reality over other beings or other entities. Both concepts represent forms of anthropocentrism. So we are the privileged in a way. Human beings are the privileged to have access to that correlation. The unsurpassable relation between the transcendental ego or lived body and the world in phenomenology is one of the many variants of correlationism. Of course, there are others, which include language and being in Wittgenstein, Derrida and Lacan, the power of knowledge in Foucault, etc. I don't know if I want to go in there. Okay, I will just mention the topics. So Kant's core epistemological hypothesis is twofold. Kant argues that objects conform to mind rather than mind to objects. This is the first hypothesis. But also Kant argues that we can never know the reality as it is in itself apart from us. So we always have an observer in the system that defines what is reality, but only as it appears to that specific observer. So it is some sort of a second-order cybernetics where we have the observer, but is that true? Do we always need that observer to have reality? This is a big question. What if we don't have observers? Reality stops, it does not exist. What happens? What happens if all observers are vanished from Earth's face? Do we have reality? Does the world continues? What happens if we don't have human beings or living organisms and we only leave behind us artificial systems that have some sort of purpose? Is reality there or it stops? Do we have a reality? So how can we escape that correlation? It is very difficult to escape it. And this is the core problem in defining how interaction can be designed and take place. Of course, there are many attempts with flat ontology, and the same applies with Latour. He tries also to escape the correlation. Okay, I will not go further. I will possibly stop here. This is the big question for me. How can we escape that correlation and what we can do to escape it and think about designing things that are not necessarily dependent on the observer.
So you mean the correlation that is being established by the observer that makes the meaning, or that creates the relation?
One thing is the meaning, the other thing is the reality of what happens.
What is being taken as
there reality. Are two things. You see, in a correlation, you have thinking and being. And being is one thing, thinking is another in terms of the Kantian approach. But we only have access to that correlation. We cannot escape it. but do we have tools to escape it? For instance, MASU supports that we can do it with mathematics.
I don't fully understand. So, how do you call the correlation? How did you define that?
So correlation is
in the sense of Hume, so that we find that there is one correlation between one phenomenon and the other.
No,
Is that, or?
the idea of correlation is that we can never escape the correlation between thinking and being. We are all
the relation
No,
under thinking and
we only have access to that correlation between thinking and being. We can never escape that.
okay.
This is what MASU supports. We cannot escape that. Okay, I understand it's a very difficult problem, and possibly it's not easy to solve it, but think about it. Do we have access?
It's very difficult because the human thinking something to do something.
Yes, but imagine that I can code the system. I can put some initial conditions. I can code an artificial system, put some initial conditions, let it act on its own without having necessarily what we call, thinking for human beings.
Automatically.
Yeah. I mean, it gets data from its sensors. It has some mechanism to process that data, and it produces meaning. And then it acts upon the world. It sees its actions, and it produces more meaning about what happens.
In what you have presented, I have one problem with Kant.
Okay.
So what Kant is stating is not a statement about reality. That reality depends on the interpretation of the observer, of the subject. But it is that the only access to the object that the subject has,
Okay.
it depends on the subject itself. So the conceptual framework that the subject has. But it's not that the reality is not there. Actually, he makes the point that reality is there, so the object is there, and the subject is transcendental towards the object, wants to know something, but is limited to the capacity of the observer, the capacity of the subject, and has and what the subject is doing while gaining any knowledge about the object is first putting something, like for example the space and the time to see what happened, and so this is given by the subject. Is the way we order so what we know about the objects.
But reality is not independent, you see.
No, but in reality, in a sense, he doesn't state nothing like that. So reality, the object and the reality is transcendental
Okay.
to the subject.
Okay.
So the subject strives to know about.
Okay, of course,
And
but he can
limited.
but he can never reach that reality.
Yeah, and one of the reasons of phenomenology is that we cannot speak directly of the subject. The phenomenon is the manifestation of the object.
Of course.
And we can, and how the objects are being manifested, I can find the relation that exists between the manifestation of the object. But at the same time, something that Kant wanted to overcome is the limitation that was being seen by Hume with respect to the correlation that exists between different phenomena. So we cannot state something, and I think it's kind of connected to what Thomas was also willing to say. For the human beings as having something different to others is the capacity of imagining, the capacity of finding out something in the future, to find out, play with ideas, and to see, create models. So you create a model of reality, then at the end you can see, okay, there is a good relation, there is a good correspondence, a possibility of mapping, and then I can find out some causal relation.
or functional relation. So it's not only correlations. So
but again, you are within a conceptual model there. You cannot escape it.
Yes. So
it is something,
a conceptual model is very different to the correlations. For example, what the artificial intelligence can look for. So they just look for correlations between this thing and this other thing. We don't look correlation between this thing and this other thing. So we make like one of the good things of our capacity that I think is not restricted just to humans.
But the problem is not that we don't have access to the reality, to what is the transcendental. The problem with correlationism is that we only have access to that relation between being and what we think about and thinking. It's not about the reality. It's that we are bounded by our thinking. This is the problem with correlationism. It's not that the transcendental does not exist. Okay, reality is beyond us. Okay, but why are we bounded by why we are limited by the relation between thinking and being?
Yeah, okay.
It's a philosophy of
thinking on the first place. In the first place, if you say that there is a problem with the split between matter and thinking, we can and stating that maybe we can reduce that to relations. Actually, kind of the phenomenology put in terms of the relations that exist between.
This is Latour's problem as well. if you see what I mean, because his theory, his actor network theory, ends up to become a relational theory, a theory of relations.
Of course.
So you see, what else? What else we can do? We have to overcome this problem.
Yeah, but the reality itself is also made upon the relations that exist between the parts, and when I relate to the object, that is something that is existing, so it's a reality, it's part of the reality.
Of course, but it happens even when we are not there.
Okay, there are different relations.
Yeah, but we already need the relations. We always already need the relations to access them. You see, we're bounded by that. Yes,
of course, and that's the reason why in physics there is this indeterminacy principle. There is always a limitation because you need to interact in order to know something about the system, and then you change the system, and then you can only know a part. But at least you can get to know something about how the relation happens. So.
Yes, but how can we imagine that? Let's say it's not the correlation is not something that we have, but other entities cannot do it better than us. For instance, have access to the reality better than us.
What entities?
Mathematics, maybe.
Yeah, but mathematics itself.
It's not easy to find.
Mathematics is kind of.
It's a model,
or it's an instrument. It's a tool.
Yes, but it goes beyond human imagination.
To express, okay, it doesn't matter. That's also something interesting from Kant is that he doesn't think in the properties of the human itself, but whatever is capable to abstract and to think, and so it's like very abstract in that regard. So it doesn't matter what is thinking.
What is a solution to this question?
I don't think that there is a solution. The thing is that if we agree with the question, I said that it's very, it's something that is philosophical work in progress, and there is a whole movement there that tries to see what we can do in terms of how can we construct an ontology on top of this that goes beyond the correlationist boundary we have there. And this is a difficult philosophical question. It's not easy to answer. And of course, there are many approaches in dealing with it, like object-oriented ontology and Meyasu's approach in defining and tackling correlationism. There are many different within the speculative realist agenda. There are many different, I would say, branches. It is a whole philosophical movement. So I don't think it is work in progress. I don't think we can give answers there.
I have just a remark on phenomenology,
Of course.
which is my favorite philosophical approach. Well, if I understand you correctly, your starting point is that there is a subject and there is an object, reality, and a subject perceiving it.
This is what phenomenology defines, really.
I don't think so, but the problem, just the problem. So I think you want to, the starting point is that there is an object like reality and a subject perceiving it. And the problem,
This is the Kantian.
well, let me finish and then.
Okay, yeah.
And the problem is, in your opinion, or in this anti-correlationist movement, the problem is that the subject somehow biases or influences reality, and it can't perceive it as it is. And what you want is to avoid the subject and to deal just with the object as it is, in order to avoid this let's say, unprecise perception.
I wouldn't say that we have direct access.
No, we don't. But
this is not even Kantian's approach. I mean, he does not state that, but he states that we only have access to that relation between being and thinking.
So you don't want to avoid the subject in order to get to the object. It's not your intention. So what was your intention then?
To go beyond the correlation.
And where to?
To experiment with the design of things, interactions that do not necessarily are bound to that correlation.
You mean to define better the interaction? The purpose is
differently. Because when we interact with the world, when we are within the phenomenological tradition and explain the world as phenomenology does, we only have access to that correlation. Okay, let's say it works like that. But can we design things that are beyond that?
But beyond, you mean they have direct access to reality, or what would it mean?
Yeah, possibly. Why not?
But no, I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
In this slide, you say philosophies that fall within this definition of correlationism are called philosophies of access, and privilege the human being's access to reality of other entities. So the problem, as I understand it, is the subjective nature of the perception, that we have somehow better access to reality, but we don't have access to the whole of reality.
It's not even better. We have some access to. We have some access, according to the phenomenology. We have access to that correlation, which works as a proxy to gives us access to the reality. But we cannot go beyond that. We always have that. How can I say? It works as a mental model for us. We have that mental model. We are bounded by that correlation.
But is it positive or negative that we have this access?
I think it is a problem.
So
I think
you don't want us to have the access?
It is possibly the boundary of our existence. I don't know, but it's not necessary to be for everyone. I mean, for everything, for other entities beyond the anthropocentric. So
the problem is that we have just a limited access because other entities have different access.
They have different access.
Definitely. And you want to have a wider perspective, not limited by the anthropological
possibly take into account other accesses.
Yeah.
And as I said before, possibly initiate the design process of having entities that have better access,
Yeah. So that
or different access in a way.
Yeah.
Not better, but different, I would say.
So design entities or design
or influence at least entities that will get different types of accesses beyond the thinking and being.
So to consider also access of other entities apart from humans.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah, now I understand.
There is a big question. For instance, Ian Bogost in his book Alien Phenomenology, he states, "How does that game I play think about me?"
Yeah. Okay.
It is much more richer, I would say, to have such access to reality, and compared to just think that I am the observer, I'm the master of everything, and game is just a toy on my hands. But imagine that we have a game that thinks about me, and to make it more concrete, imagine that I have a car that thinks about the reality around it, and it can create interactions that are very interesting. And for instance, in the conference, in the workshop we did in past year in digital humanism, there was a paper presented there about the decisions of a self-driving car. I don't know if you remember it, from a Chinese author that was describing what the car will do if we have different contexts, and it has to make decisions, and it has a different access to the reality. How do we code that car? For instance, he was saying that if we have a crossroad and we have some people crossing, and we also have some sort of a wall, what the car will do if it identifies that I have people crossing the crossroad, and also I cannot brake? Should it kill the people, or okay, the car also carries some old people in it. This was the dilemma in a way. So we have free will there, and we have a dilemma. What the car will do? Will it kill the kids crossing the crossroad, or will it kill the elderly that it carries in it?
In the night notice yesterday, speak about this. Mercedes programmed these our cars by the decision is protect the driver.
Yeah, but the author there posed some ethical questions. For instance, in Europe or in the Western world, we want the younger to survive. Okay, so the car will drive on the wall and kill the seniors. But in China, things are different.
Yeah.
The seniors are the important, so let's kill the kids. Why not?
Do you know this is the MIT Moral Machine game?
Yeah. It's a
where they compare answers of different cultures. And then they make some clusters.
But
again, we have
the countries need unify the ethical point of view of the question.
Yeah, but
of course,
sometimes you can't do it.
Yeah, free will is not easy. It's not always easy.
It's very difficult.
No, that's one topic. So Capurro, that was participating the day before yesterday, and will speak tomorrow. He said me yes. He's one of his specialties is intercultural information ethics.
Yes,
intercultural information ethics, and
will he speak tomorrow on that?
He will not about that, but if we ask him,
we can drive it.
Yes, we can. If you want about something like that, I have one article written with him, and there are several things that we take for granted that this has to be like that, and then if you go to the Japanese culture, or you go to the Buddhist culture, to the Confucianist culture, and so on, then things are seen very different. Even from the conceptual space, things that we see like yes or not, there is one kind of answer that the Japanese give when something
it's not so clear that it's something in between. And so we have, even in the very simple understanding of things, way that cultures are biasing, and that makes even at the end, so the ethical values, so what we consider it important and not important, things that we can
And
not
imagine
do,
that, and imagine that is something that is sort of human, and we can communicate it, and we can possibly make sense out of what happens. And on another level, we can create meaning on that and take decisions. Imagine when we have an AI system that we cannot understand the rules that it created. And
yeah, but there are many things we cannot understand that,
of course,
how they work. So in all around us, in our living environment, in our environment,
of course.
So
even
there are
non-living things.
Non-living and living. So and there are, in general, most of the things that are around us are very complex and we don't understand them.
Yes, of course.
But that doesn't mean they have a meaning, they have a purpose, they have the capacity to think what is going to happen, and they can think ethically. And I think that's the point that Thomas wanted to do this morning. That for the time being, we are still kind of far from having, for an artificial intelligence that has conscious, can really imagine what is going to happen, as to provide them ethical categories and ethical properties. So of course we need to consider that they are within the framework of making decisions, because at the end they are making decisions, and things are happening when we interact with the artificial intelligence. But this is like kind of this decay that would you explain, and that Capurro has stated in the previous day, that there are some causalities, things that we cannot count with. And I would put it more in that sense. With artificial intelligence, there are many things we cannot count, instead of considering what they are really interpreting of. But of course, for example, with animals, I for the time being, I'm pretty sure that many animals have the capacity to interpret and make some plans, and there are some difference, of course, but there is a degree of.
Then I understand well. Modestos defend the idea that the philosophies are a way to solve these situations, because ethical values it's not sufficient, and have different cultures and the other questions. You think that philosophies in this case will be a possibility to solve these situations?
I think that philosophy has the capacity to experiment and theorize about with even I don't know if we can do it. Philosophy is not about giving answers, after all, but posing the questions, in my opinion. But I think it can give us better questions. This is what I'm asking. This is what I'm possibly looking for. And these questions can possibly give us clues about how to define then things that we use in designing things, in creating social relations, in understanding the society, the human, the reality. Between the pragmatic and the philosophical, there is always a gap, in my opinion. We cannot solve it because, in a way, again, we are bounded within the same correlation. We cannot escape it, in a way. I don't know. You see, it's
one point is that I wouldn't say that artificial intelligence or cars are free in the same sense people are free. It's a different type of freedom. It's like,
Of course, it is different.
because, you know, men's or human freedom is related to the awareness of different options and choosing between them, and realizing that if you realize one option, that you can't realize another one, and it's like having the space open for many options but choosing just one. I mean, this is different to the way cars.
But when you have something that interprets its environment and can create new rules in the way that it acts, then it's not much different, I would say.
Yeah, I think that freedom is not creating of rules, it's also based on decision. And this is, I think, different to how...
But decisions are in a way related to some rules.
Well, to some extent, but you also have to agree with the rules.
Or
And you can also disagree. There are some...
Yes, but you can break the rules and move forward and create new rules. But that is not necessarily something that AI cannot do.
I think it is based either on determinism, it has to do it, or chance. Chance is different to freedom. But another point, more important than that, I would say that what we want in this overcoming of creationism is sort of, let's say, overcoming the limits every human has. Phenomenology is based on the perception of the way we perceive the world. And the position you want to achieve is something which is artificial, which is not related to who we as humans are. We face the situation that we can't understand the world completely, like in ethics. You can never be sure what the good for another person is. You have just some hints, and you do your best to help him, but you can never be sure. And this limit, this openness, is something which is uncrossable, which is always here. And you want to cross it and to have it at your disposal, to understand it, which would mean the end of this openness. So I think your position is something which is unachievable, and it's like having another position to what we as human beings have, like God's perception, something like that. It is something which we somehow perceive, but cannot achieve, and we have to be happy with the position we have, because it's impossible to achieve it. We have just some hints. The world is another example, also related to Caporo. He has to have his speech because we always talk about him. The world can always surprise us, to show us something different. There is empathy, for example. So we can understand to some extent another people, another beings, another animals. But just to some extent, we can never be sure we completely understand them.
It's not necessary to understand it.
Or to
having access does not mean that.
But what you want is to cross out this limited character of human finitude, and I think it's impossible, because this is what phenomenology does. It shows what our limits are, uncrossable limits.
Yes, but what happens after the limits? This is where we become creative. You see, I understand that you see the boundary. You see the boundary.
We would like to cross it, but we never cross it completely.
We never cross it in ourselves. What about if we involve in the game entities that work differently?
To some extent they can, but never completely. Achieving it would mean that we would be gods. Knowing everything. But this is something which is just deduced from our perspective, because we know we are limited and we want to overcome it completely, but never. This is impossible to achieve. And this is satisfaction with our situation. Okay, we'll do our best. Sometimes we open new horizons, cross the limits, but we'll never cross every limit. This is ethically hubris, and practically impossible because we are finite beings.
Yes, but we are at the same time tool beings, and we design our world.
Completely okay.
And why not being able to design or coexist with something that crosses the limit and gives us access to that? I don't say that you as Thomas or me as Modestos one day will wake up and will transcend the correlation. It's impossible to do it, in ourselves. But we have the capacity to design things that can possibly do it.
But not to remove, just not to remove, but to move it. It's like Anaximandros has the idea of peras and apeiron.
Yes.
We can cross the peras, the limit, but the apeiron will move one step further. So we never know everything.
Yeah, it is the problem that we have with apeiron, that it is when you go beyond it, you created another one, and your knowledge is within it again. But
you cannot remove it completely, so that there are no limits. I think this is impossible and disregards the human position or our human experience.
But it's not exactly like that, you see, because the boundary that we have from the correlation is not apeiron. I see it as a boundary around us that creates the worldview.
I don't understand the apeiron. What's that?
The apeiron, no, I don't understand it either. But
it's an idea. Anaximandros, apeiron is something like infinity.
Okay, the peiron is the horizon. Peiron, and the apeiron is the when.
So if you learn something new, so for instance, the perspective on an animal,
the
apeiron will be removed to some extent, but it will just skip to.
But we don't have to go there. I mean, it's not a problem of playing with sets of apeiron like we do in mathematics, and we can understand that you never cross the apeiron. Another apeiron is emerging there. So the problem here is, I think, how we escape the correlation, not the apeiron. The correlation is our, but in a way, it's our way of seeing the world.
But you,
to some extent, but never completely.
But you see, so the correlation is a correlation that is established between the thinking and
the being.
But here, I think you mentioned something that I wanted to point out, and which is the empathy. And I want to bring it to the cosmological principle, in the sense that something that is interesting of the thinking of the complexity of our nervous system is that just from the perspective of the network of the parts that contains, the complexity is so high that can represent something which is so complex as things that we observe in the universe, and they work pretty much the same, in the sense that what we can think and the matter that we use for thinking is the same matter that we have outside. It makes that we can have a kind of extended idea of the empathy. So it gives us the possibility of having an empathy of the things, and it's the kind of understanding that that Kant tries to see beyond the criticism given by Hume, that the only thing we see are correlations. No, we can see more, because we are, when we are similar to them, we can find out causal relations or intentional relations, because we are not that different as the other. And I think that makes a difference with respect to what the artificial intelligence is doing. It's just doing correlations, looking only for correlations. I just wanted to stress a little bit that we have further capacity than just correlation. Something that
it is difficult to spot it, but I would say that
it is correlation. It is an understanding of the underlying stuff that makes it work. Like when we have empathy, we solve many of the problems in our social world because we can be empathic with the other people, and then we get to solve the problem instead of saying, okay, there are different points of view. Okay, you may have your idea, I have my idea, and we will fight because the perspective of each of us is different. But I can be empathic with the other and say, okay, maybe it's a better solution if we do something else. So we can also put on the situation of others, but not only people, also animals and things. And I think this is not the same thing with the things and with the animals. They don't have the same capacity.
But again, in animals, you can
To some
possibly
extent,
say
yeah.
that you have the same
But
situation.
not the same.
You have some sort of similar situation.
More limited, but to some extent, yeah.
Possibly being is different, thinking is different.
So I think that the language makes us a huge difference. So in the capacity to symbolically refer the world. So it makes a change in the matter of the neuronal network of the kid when learns the language.
Language is a structure of it's a tool that we use, and it helps us in the thinking part.
So Heidegger says that thinking. So it is language what is thinking in me.
Okay.
Language is thinking in me, and
Yeah.
sometimes it happens. So actually, so we have words, we have relations between words. The relations between the words sometimes solve the problems. The only thing is that we need to connect them, and then we find that solution. It's like the language solve the problem. We just utilize it. We just find the path within our minds.
We are still bound in the correlation because language in itself didn't do anything. It stays there. If you take, for granted that language is not intentional, it stays there. We are the intention machines. We do it.
Well, sometimes it's also intentional because it, as Jose said,
it contains sometimes the intention of the collectivity of the which is this is the idea of Luhmann. So
you are the horizon.
So I am the tool.
Yes.
In a sense.
You're the horizon of the social system. No, actually, it's quite complicated to say that. Not complicated. It's quite simplistic to say that that language has intentional behavior.
No. Okay,
But,
this is metaphorically.
Yeah,
but
it
in
is
a sense,
metaphoric, but it doesn't act in itself. It is we evaluate the outcome of it.
But wait a moment. If we could consider that general will exist as something that is a part of a social body, of a collective, if that happens, and then the language expresses that general will, then at the end we can it can kind of contain it.
Okay.
The intention. So, but the intention is like the general will of the society that are willing to read something.
Okay, and if you consider it as such, yes, you can possibly do it, but okay.
The limits of your language are limits of your thinking.
Yeah.
Or you can say, you can think.
So the metaphors can help us to go beyond.
Okay.
And they always help us to go beyond. And it's actually the way we are interpreting better the world and our capacity to do it better. So the metaphors, I think, are an important thing. I want to make only one note. You said that the meaning that is acting upon us, so to argue about the concept of meaning. So what you were stating about phenomenology and the limits of phenomenology. So 107 years ago, Ortega y Gasset
stated that
Mhm.
right several months after Husserl has spoken
Mhm.
the method of phenomenology as
Mhm.
a breach of that, but in terms not of meaning in general,
Mhm.
but in the terms that there are some meanings which are beliefs that are the ones that are really acting upon us.
Mhm.
And there is a distinction that is being made by him, by Ortega, between the beliefs that are the ones that are acting upon us and the ideas.
Mhm.
And with the ideas are with the ones that we can really play and that we can imagine
Mhm.
and that we can work more freely and that facilitate us to interpret with kind of a freedom.
Mhm.
But the phenomenology is kind of bounded because you cannot skip those beliefs, because one of the fundamentals of the method of phenomenology is to take the concepts away, to take the judgments away. Don't judge.
Mhm.
So just try to collect, like within ethnography, try to collect all the data,
Mhm.
try to collect everything that happens without the judgment, put it in apogee.
Mhm.
But we have this limitation, as Ortega put it at the very beginning of the
But that's also the limitation of the anti-connectionism.
anti-correlation.
Yeah. That's exactly
Mhm.
my point. We can't avoid the judgment. We can't skip out of our existence. We can move it, we can cross it to some extent, extend it,
Mhm.
but you cannot step out of it.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
that's exactly my point.
we can. I never say that we can possibly. I don't know if we can do it. Possibly we cannot. But
Sorry.
yeah, the question is that whether we see the intentional objects as correlates of a thinker, or that they have an autonomous status, and
But to some extent they are, but to some extent they aren't. You know, it's because
why not having an autonomous status?
it would be naive realism. The autonomous status of
I think we can continue this philosophical wandering in the
Later on.
with tapas.
Yes.
So let's go, because
Yes.
we have an appointment at
It's the best
8:30.
moment.
So yes. So
But
then
it is
so to with somebody else.
Moncoya, Carter.
No, in
thank
Moncloa.
you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you too.
The end of the session.
Long session. The problem with philosophy is that
Eternal session.
it might never end.
See you tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
I close.
One of my